Yeo, yeo, yeo. Hello and welcome back to Reclaim Within. This week we're diving into a oh so potent topic for our world today, compassion. So I had a request to talk about compassion, and then this last weekend I was in a retreat and it kept popping up all over the place of people trying to understand how to be with others in what they're moving through and not quite being able to get there. So let's dive in. Compassion is something that must be built. It's a muscle. And that's why I think it's such an interesting thing to talk about. Oftentimes we get a little confused, I think, with what is empathy versus compassion versus sympathy, and they're actually quite different. Empathy comes from being empathic, so being able to feel what someone else feels, but it's almost like a taking it on. Empathy can oftentimes trigger this behavior of fixing. Like, I can feel you being uncomfortable and I don't like it, so I want it to change. Right? And so that a lot of times people who have a lot of empathy will not be comfortable with it, and so they want it to shift or change or let me. What is so beautiful and so wild about compassion is it is something that we build, and we can continue to build it. It's something that we build and build and build. Compassion, it's a Latin word, so the roots of the word is cum and passio, meaning together and to suffer. So at its core, compassion actually means to suffer together. So just take a second and notice, what does that definition bring up in you? What is your immediate reaction to learning that to have compassion means to suffer together? I feel like that definition is so beautiful and wild. And when I first heard of that definition, it actually made me feel uncomfortable. I had a tendency to be much more on the empathic side of things for a very long time. And I wasn't necessarily taught how to sit with my own pain and suffering. In my, last decade of training and being able to sit with beautiful mentors and teachers that have come from all over the world, I've learned the brilliance and the strength that is created with really sitting with what is and really allowing for yourself to feel your pain, to be with your own suffering is what builds the muscle to be able to be with someone else's suffering, because I will know that I can sit with something that hurts, and I know that I will get to the other side because I have allowed myself to fully be in that space over and over and over again. And so to have compassion is to know that you have built a muscle to be able to sit with what is not perfect in this life, what is not ideal. We are here having the human experience, meaning that we are here for all parts of that human experience. And when it's beautiful and when there's giggles and laughter and joy, it's like the most amazing thing in the whole world. And yet that's just one part of what we're here to experience. To be fully human means that we get to also sit in grief and hurt and sadness. And so many times when I work with people, they'll let themselves dip their toe tiny little bit in a little bit of grief or a little bit of suffering. And then it's like, oh, okay, we got to move on now, fix it, forward motion, right? But then when their loved ones, people that they really care about, they're in a place where they're hurting, they can't meet them there because they're not willing to meet themselves there. So it's a practice. So I'm going to attempt today to speak to why we should cultivate compassion and how we can do that. So I'm going to attempt to put words to it. So bear with me. So compassion is much more than a feeling. Get it? So it's a way of being that actually initiates transformation. Because when we are able to sit in full acceptance of ourselves or another person and just allow for ourselves to fully be present with what is, we can then fully relate to ourselves or others or the world. That's what initiates transformation. That's where we're allowed to then be whatever it is that we are in that moment. And we get to be felt and seen and validated in that life experience. So, why cultivate it? Well, it heals the self. So, compassion for ourselves actually helps us to release shame, guilt, and self criticism. It has allowed for me to see my mistakes and places where I've been out of integrity as opportunities for growth rather than places for me to self-punish. And I was really good at self-criticizing for a while there. So compassion teaches us that imperfection is not a flaw, but a natural part of being human, of this human experience that we're having. And if we can witness ourselves in our mess ups, in our mistakes, in our communication errors as places where we can then grow from and learn from rather than a place to beat up on ourselves, so much can shift. Your relationship to self completely can transform. Another reason to cultivate compassion is that it deepens relationships. Compassion will foster understanding and it'll reduce conflict. I am living proof of this. So there are so many times where we misunderstand someone else's intentions, where someone will say something and because of our own life experiences, we take that as something harmful or hurtful. And there has been many times where I'll use my relationship as an example. My husband will say something and he says it not in a way that he wants to hurt my feelings, and yet it strikes a chord because I take the information in as a criticism. Yet that was not actually how he intended it. That was never his intention to harm or to hurt. So through developing compassion for myself and for him, I was able to realize at first it would hurt. Okay, that hurt. And then I would ask clarifying questions. Instead of just assuming that what he said was a harmful, hurtful thing, I would say, hey, did you mean to say that in this way? Did you mean to actually share that in a way that makes me feel this way? And every time he's like, no, what? You took it that way? And it allows for so much relief and a diffuse of tension. And then it allows for us to have a healthier conversation. And we actually then can have more connection with one another. And vice versa, when I say something and I can notice that my words strike a chord with somebody, I can come back and say, hey, I think that maybe you took that the wrong way. I did not mean it to come out the way it did. And I'd like an opportunity to redo. So much bonding and so much healing can happen when we can notice ourselves and others and how we might perceive the world and how different it might be from somebody else. It allows for us to re-enter the space and allows for there to be enough of a question mark or curiosity to diffuse any of that frustration or tension that might come up. Another reason we couldn't cultivate compassion is that it actually enhances our perspective. It helps us step out of our limited perspective, like in the example I just gave, and it actually allows us to see the complexity of our experiences and others' experiences. So reflect on a time, if you can, where maybe you softened your judgment by considering someone else's struggles or someone else's perspective. Compassion opens the door to sacredness. I truly believe that compassion connects us to the sacred rhythm of life because it allows us to meet each moment with so much reverence. Even in the midst of a huge challenge, you can find that space where you can question, how do I grow from this? How do I learn from this? What am I not seeing? And it allows for you to find meaning in the messy, imperfect parts of your life. I had a lot of loss last year. Oh, wow. And a lot that I did not expect. To be able to be in rhythm with that loss and not beat myself up about it or beat someone else up about it, but just realizing that there was a lot of either lack of communication or that I was just going through a huge transformation. And I was in the middle of it. I was going through a giant initiation this last year. And every time I'd go through another loss, I would be like, oh, so humbled. But that humility allowed for me to really see those challenges and the messiness of the human experience, and honestly be in so much awe and wonder for the fact that we all even function and how we function. I have so much reverence for grief now on the other side of last year. I understand it so much more than I ever had before because of how much I was holding myself in all of that. All of that comes with grief. So much. And now I get to understand that and have compassion for others going through that on a whole new level. And that is such a gift. So let's talk about how to actually cultivate compassion. Let's talk about the practices that we can maybe put in place. Now that we understand why cultivate it, let's actually talk about the how. So again, it's a muscle, but strengthened with our attention and our intention. I'm going to just list off 6 ways that I have used in my own life to cultivate more compassion in your day-to-day. So the first step, or the first one, is actually just start with yourself. The more and more that you allow for yourself to sit with your feelings, your emotions, the hard days you're having, and not judge them, and really work on shifting out of the inner critic dialogue to having that inner compassion dialogue, that will be the most impactful and important building block for being able to build compassion. Here's an example. I used to call my inner critic Bertha. I needed to cultivate a bit of self-awareness to do this, but when I would catch myself criticizing myself, I would actually just pause and I would speak to Bertha. And I would say, "Excuse me, Bertha. That was not very nice to say to Ash. She does not need that right now. You can go sit down." Or something like that. And I would be like in the middle of bawling my eyes out, right? So it was like a funny, I would laugh at myself a lot. Find a name to name your inner critic. And that is a number one practice for building compassion, is just start with you. Another really practical way you could do this is creating a simple self-compassion mantra that you can repeat to yourself over and over and over again as much as needed. Something like, I am doing my absolute best, or I am having a hard day and I am still doing my best. This is my best right now. Something like that. Okay. Another one is to practice presence. So compassion really does require being fully present with what is. So whether it is your own pain or someone else's. And this can be difficult. So being with what is when you're not feeling great can be hard. Practices like deep breathing or meditation, or I like to go for walks. So trying a quick grounding exercise, just focusing on your breath for 6 inhales and 6 exhales really slowly, or walking and making sure that you notice feeling your feet on the ground, just being really present with what is. Because what happens is when we get uncomfortable with the feelings that are coming up, we'll go to the future, we'll go to the past, we'll just ninja ourselves into any other thing that we can without, except for just being present with what is. So very simple, very not easy, but really can improve your ability to hold compassion, is just practicing being present, meditating every day, ground every day, breathe every day. Sound, movement, and breath, those are there for you always to work on that practicing of presence. Okay. Third way to practice compassion is attempt to listen without judgment. The power of listening to someone with an open heart, that in itself can initiate so much transformation. So witness yourself when someone else is speaking. Are you thinking of other things? Are you thinking of what you're going to say next? Are you jumping to your brain about how you can help fix whatever the problem they have coming up? If you can just listen to someone and silently repeat to yourself, or at the end of their sentence with them, is I hear you, I see you. Or my favorite thing to do is if you're going to play a game with it, because sometimes listening without judgment when you first start can be really difficult. So I like to play a game with it where I'm like, okay, I'm going to listen so hard to what they're saying. This is what I did when I first started learning this. And then when they're done saying whatever they say, I'm going to repeat back to them what I heard. And I'll even do this sometimes still to be like, so this is what I heard you just say. Especially if things are really heated or really powerful, you can like feel how passionate someone's talking. At the end of when they stop talking, I'll come back with, all right, this is what I heard. Can you tell me if what I heard is correct or not? And oh my gosh, the level of shifting and empowerment that can happen just from asking those questions is awesome. Another way to cultivate compassion is look for the humanity in the other person. Just pause and consider that other person you're speaking to, or that other person that's on the television, or whatever it is, and the fact that they have their own personal struggles. They have their own personal struggles that got them to where they're at. And what that can do just by considering that you have no idea what that other person went through, or maybe you have all the ideas, and you can actually then from that place just shift out of how dare you, how dare they, to like, you know what? I actually have never walked a mile in that person's shoes. And until I do that, I probably am not going to point at them, because when I point at them, I have 3 fingers pointing back at me. That's remembering or looking for the humanity in others. It's actually pausing our reactive behavior to someone else's behavior and actually just being like, what might they be going through? What might they have gone through in this life? What is their soul here to learn? And every time, even if it doesn't make it right, it allows for me to shift enough to be like, all right, I don't know. I actually don't know what it's like to be them. I'm going to honor their humanness, and I'm going to choose to, honor my humanness. And maybe that means I need to still walk away, but that looking for the humanity in others will help pull you off of any righteousness that you might be standing up on. Finding grace in imperfections. How can you just find more grace for the little pieces of being human and embrace them in an act of compassion? I was going through a really hard time a couple years back, and I didn't call someone back. And it wasn't because I didn't care about them or wasn't appreciative of them or anything like that. Actually, I was so in my own spiral of confusion and pain and overwhelm that I just didn't call them back. And it was a couple years later where I heard through the grapevine that that person I never called back really didn't like me because I didn't call them back. And I remember feeling so hurt because I was an imperfect human. I was imperfect. And I never got a phone call or a text message being like, hey, you really hurt me. It was like through someone else that I heard this. I remember in that moment feeling like I'm so imperfect. There's something wrong with me. What did I do? And I actually then went back in and I relived the whole scenario just by myself, with myself, because this is what I do. And I reshaped the whole thing. And I had that person text me like a week later and be like, hey, I'm really hurt that you never responded to my call. I feel really, I feel like we had a really great connection. You never got back to me. And I reached back out and was like, oh my gosh, it has nothing to do with you. It was all me, right? Like just the grace in the imperfections and cultivating that, reframing imperfection as opportunities to grow or even opportunities to actually connect and get closer to somebody. Huge shift. And it didn't even actually happen in the outside world, but it happened in my inside world. And I felt like that shifted so much for me. So where can you actually find more grace for someone else in what they're going through? Or ask yourself, what could they be going through that they didn't call me back? It's a really, really good one. Another way to cultivate compassion is just to take compassionate action. it's like offering a hand, or just asking if somebody, would you like to tell me about that? Or do you want me to hold your hand? Or can I give you a hug? Or start small by just telling somebody, hey, you know what? Like, I'm feeling really uncomfortable with your emotions right now, but I do want to be here for you. I want to support you, even if I don't know how. It doesn't take that much to start to move those muscles, build those muscles, so that you can actually be able to build more and more compassion for yourselves and for others. And, compassion isn't always the recipe. Sometimes we need boundaries. Sometimes we need to be able to say, to let go. And yet, I do think that in this world at this time, more compassion, starting with the self, and then trickling out to all of our relationships, because relationships really are the fabric of all of our lives. When our relationships are feeling good and we feel healthy and seen and loved and cared for, there's just no better feeling. But it takes a lot of tools to learn how to be in right relationship, especially because we've come so far away from being woven in like that in our world. And so it's time for us to be able to self-orient, acknowledge ourselves more, and then be able to practice having this compassion for both ourselves and others. Cultivating compassion is a practice, and one that starts with self-awareness. You got to sprinkle in some presence and just very intentional, small actions every day, a little bit more grounding, a little bit more sitting with what actually is present in the moment, a little bit more witnessing yourself and others when we're uncomfortable with somebody else's discomfort, and just practicing being more okay with the fact that we are here as human beings for all of it. We are going to experience love and joy and pleasure, but we are also here to experience some pain and sorrow and surrender. And it's all actually really beautiful when you come from this perspective of compassion, because the heart can really hold it all. It really, really can. We're scared that it won't be able to, but that's where the maturing comes in. The more we allow ourselves to hold our humanity in all of it, the more we allow ourselves to mature and become who we are here to be, fully, wholly, all of ourselves. So what is one small way that you can bring compassion into your life today, whether it's for yourself or someone around you? Thank you so much for joining me today and for listening. I would love it if you would share this episode if it resonates with you, or if there's anybody in your life that you feel like could learn some tools around self-compassion. Or if you feel like it, I would love to hear from you. So please let me know in the comments below. I'm on Substack, I'm on Instagram, YouTube, all those great places. And I'd love to hear more from you. If you would like to work with me one-on-one, I have 3 offerings. You can either join a Reclaim Within circle, where we meet weekly, 4 to 8 people, and we dive into mystery school topics, being able to actually sit with each other, building our muscles for compassion for ourselves and each other, and get really, really real with what it takes to actually build community and build connection and build healthy relationships. The other way you can work with me is to join in at the end of March, early April. I'm starting Building Your Own Inner Kingdom course, which is based off of the creation methodology. I've changed the name because I really feel like that's what we're doing. We're building our own inner kingdoms, and a lot of us inherited shacks. A lot of us inherited these rundown little shacks, and that's not actually the lives we want to be living. We want to be building kingdoms. We want to be in our own kingdoms and building relationships with other people in their kingdoms and bringing more people together. That's really what we want to be doing. But that takes some education in how to do that, because we were not taught the things in school that I believe we should have been taught. That is just me. Maybe you agree. I think it's great that we know how to do math and calculus. And at the same time, I think that our primary focus in this life, whether it's at work or at home, it's in the health of our relationships. It's in the health of our relationship to ourselves and the love and the joy that we can bring in the world with ourselves and each other. and being able to really hold all of it. So if you want to join the Inner Kingdoms course, reach out to me through email or find me on one of the social medias. And then last but not least, I have a couple more spots available if you want to work one-on-one, or I love doing couples work as well. So if you want to do a weekly or bi-weekly container where it is a dedicated mentorship where I am there to support you and hold you and move you through whatever it is that you're moving through right now, I do ask that you give me 3 months so that we can really get in there and I can hold you really deeply to move through things. And then at the end, we can create a small retreat if you'd like, or not, all good. But those are the ways you can work with me. I hope you have a beautiful day.